Matt, our viewers will be familiar with images of migrants and refugees arriving in Dover and launching from the beaches here in Calais. But what is happening this summer is different. And what we've seen over the last 24 hours is different in terms of scale and in terms of audacity. In other words, what we're seeing is something we've never quite seen before. Dramatic confrontations with police at dawn.
Wait here!
Foiled launches in the middle of the day among holidaymakers. On the day asylum claims in the UK reached a near 20-year high, again and again we captured what's driving it: small boat crossings. Even before we arrived on the beach in Dunkirk at 5 a.m. this morning, French police had dealt with numerous attempts. Then into the dunes, and another about to start. So it's quite rare to see this. The big dinghy has obviously arrived in boxes. They've taken it out. You can see them pumping it up behind the dunes here. They're putting on their life vests and a launch is about to start. The drone was up earlier, so we know that the police know that this group are here. Annual figures on asylum claims published today show applications are at a near 20-year high. The number of people crossing in small boats set to reach record levels this year, and the vast majority of those people apply for asylum when they arrive. The surprise for some will be that Albanians make up an increasing proportion of those trying in this way. In the dunes, a spotter signals to the group that there are journalists, but that the coast is clear of police. Have you got many Albanians with you? Although no one wanted to be interviewed, we were able to establish that there were a handful of Albanians in the group. Today, the UK and Albania renewed a pledge to rapidly remove those entering Britain in this way. In the dunes, it was time to move, to make the dash for the beach. The British paid the French millions to help them stop this. And here is what that money pays for. So we've got about 40 or 50 people. The police buggy has just turned up to try and stop them. One officer immediately punctures the giant dinghy. When he tries again, a migrant goes to prevent him, and the tear gas comes out. A local couple out walking on the beach object.
C'est pas nécessaire de les gazer. Vous voulez pas nous apprendre notre métier? Oh, bon, alors là. Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont? Laissez-les passer, bon.
And with that, the retreat back into the dunes until the next time. This wasn't the only attempt we witnessed in 24 hours on the beaches of northern France. Yesterday, we arrived on a busy beach near Calais in the middle of the afternoon, just after police foiled another attempt.
Wait here! Wait here! What is that?
I've been covering this story for many years. This is a first for me. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a touristy beach. 25 police officers have showed up and about 30 or 40 migrants have head over the dunes here. This is just after Monday's record daily high. What we're seeing is a new trend. Police sources are describing it to us as migrant flash mobs, where hundreds of migrants arrive on one beach and try to overwhelm the police, try to overwhelm them in terms of numbers. This time it's a Welsh family on holidays with their political tuppence worth.
Don't come to the UK, they'll send you to Rwanda.
There is, of course, plenty of electoral appetite for something to be done to curb migration flows. But the one thing that unites those on these frontline beaches, both police and migrants and refugees, no one wants to be doing this.
And the faces of some police officers were blurred in that report after a request from the French police that lower-ranking officers should not be identified. Porrick, extraordinary images there that you captured on the beaches of Calais. But tell me about the Albanians. Why so many Albanians, as far as you know?
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt, how the narrative, how the focus within government has been on Albanians over the last few days. Albanians have always been in the top 5 or so of nationalities trying to get to Britain in an irregular way over many years now. But the numbers are substantially up this year. So why? Economics, for one thing. Many of these migrants coming from Albania are economic migrants, but there is more to it. Albania has a sophisticated network of criminal gangs with close ties in Britain, and they specialise in trafficking and smuggling people into Britain for things like the sex industry or the black market in construction or car washes and the like. They're a very sophisticated operation. So, for example, take a look at these TikTok ads that we've recently seen. They advertise 100% guaranteed end-to-end travel to Britain. They talk about how you pay for this, but they'll guarantee getting you there. They boast of it, and they do so on social media. Now, if you look at the National Crime Agency figures, they point to quite a large increase in the number of trafficking cases taking place. So that is definitely a contributing factor. Another factor, these Albanian gangs traditionally have relied on lorries to get their clients or victims from A to B. That route is drying up, so Albanians are opting more for the boats, which of course is by definition a more politically heated and visual way of getting here. And finally, just in terms of the mechanics of these gangs, back in July there was a series of important arrests of people smugglers who were operating in the Kurdish people smuggling networks. That was a big blow for that network, and the working assumption among security officials that I'm talking to is that the Albanian gangs are stepping in to that vacuum.
Porrick O'Brien in Calais, thank you very much indeed. So who are the people who do make it across the Channel? Well, according to Home Office figures published today, the number of people detected arriving by small boats has more than doubled from nearly 6,000 in the first half of 2021 to over 12,700 in the same 6-month period in 2022. Of those who arrived between January and June this year, over half were nationals from just 3 countries: Albanians, Afghans and Iranians. Now, since the Taliban took over in Afghanistan just over a year ago, the number of Afghans arriving in the UK in small boats has increased almost tenfold, from 247 in the first half of 2021 to 2,066 in the first half of this year. Now, the number of Albanians arriving on small boats has increased almost 100-fold. Between January and June last year, just 23 were detected. In the same period this year, 2,165 Albanians arrived here by small boats. Hence today's deal between the British and Albanian governments to fast-track asylum applications from Albanians. Our political reporter, Sarina Barker-Singh, is in Dover now. Sarina.
Well, what's driving this plan is a concern from the UK government that people arriving in small boats from Albania and arriving here in places like Dover, where I am, well, that number has increased in the last couple of months, strikingly so. So the new figures from the Home Office today show that about 2 years ago, 50 people made the journey that way. This year, it was close to almost 6,000. And they say that that number will be vastly out of date even in about 24 hours' time. This policy, they say, will counter that. So this new deal between the Albanian government and the Home Secretary, it is a plan to speed up the process, wherever possible, the removal of these Albanian nationals if their asylum claims are illegitimate. Now, one of the proposals being worked up at the moment is for Albanian police to actually have a presence in Kent. Now, a senior Home Office source explained that they're still working through the details. So there are things like the Albanian police carry weapons, for example. That's much more unusual here. But all of that will be hashed out when a delegation comes next week and meets at the Home Office to iron out all of the details. What they're hoping for today, though, is that this promise of a police presence will actually deter people. And one of the things they've already been doing is been putting ads out, ads like this one. And what it says in Albanian is that you could face up to 4 years in jail and deportation for coming to the UK illegally. Now, various charities have also pointed out another figure that's come out today, 53%. And that figure is for legitimate claims from Albanians, people who've been granted asylum. And they say that the legal representation, then the time that you need to make that, would that still be the case with these expedited proposals? Something that Care for Calais, one of the charities that I've spoken to, their lawyers are actually looking into the detail right now, and they're actually taking the government to court on another policy, the Rwanda policy, that sees people make asylum claims in the East African country. That's going through the courts right now, a judgment to come in September. But both policies speak to the broader Home Office strategy of deterring people before making that journey here. Small boat crossings, we know, is has been a focus for the Home Secretary Priti Patel, the current Home Secretary. Reportedly, it's at the top of a list in a whiteboard in her department. And I put it today to a Tory MP who apparently has secured a place in a Liz Truss cabinet to say, has she expedited her own policy, this policy today? They say that's unlikely. It's actually widely supported within the party. Many other MPs will agree with that, and it's been in the works for ages. Whether it works in practice, well, that's a challenge for the new Home Secretary and also for the new Prime Minister.
Serena Barker-Singh, thanks very much indeed. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to Conservative member of the Home Affairs Committee, Tim Lawton. But first, I'm joined by Daniel Sahaji from the anti-child trafficking charity Love 146, which works directly with Albanian trafficking survivors. Daniel, thanks very much for coming on the programme. I mean, as we saw in Porrick's report and also Serena's report, this primarily seems to be a problem about trafficking gangs working out of the UK, bringing people over from Albania, rather than Albanians leaving Albania because it's a miserable place to live, life's unbearable or it's insecure. How would you tackle that particular problem then?
Well, part of the issue is that it's not just Albanian gangs in the UK, it's Albanian gangs actually in Albania, obviously, and they have very close ties to the state at times. So you need to look at the causes of that. Poverty is obviously a major cause of exploitation and drives people into it. So trying to tackle it by telling people don't come doesn't really make a difference to them, because as your reporter said before, 53% of asylum claims from Albanians are found to be successful. So we are seeing people who have legitimate reasons to claim asylum. And you need to focus on that side of it so that you can then start tackling the trafficking gangs at source as well and finding ways to protect those who need it.
But you're protecting them from a terrible fate, working effectively in modern slavery in the UK by keeping them in the UK and giving them asylum in this country.
By protecting them in the UK and giving them asylum, you can actually help to reduce how the gangs have a grip on them. So if you are telling people that if you come forward and you've been trafficked, you come forward, you will be arrested, the gangs then can use that to say, if you go forward, you will be arrested and deported. Now, returning somebody who's been trafficked to Albania puts them at risk of re-exploitation, because the gangs who've trafficked them in the first place still want to get their money's worth. If you provide them with asylum, then they can potentially get support through organisations like Love 146 or any other ones, which can then help to remove them from that system of exploitation.
And how do you explain this extraordinary 100-fold increase from one year to the next? I mean, have the gangs just got much better organised? Has industry picked up again, as it were, their industry after the pandemic? How do you explain it?
There's no one thing. I think that's crucial to say. There's no one thing you can target on it to say that's directly caused it. The pandemic we've seen an increase in referrals to the National Referral Mechanism in the UK, for example. So we are seeing trafficking on the increase in that respect, or more to the point, people being identified as trafficking. So there's an element of that involved in this, that when we have a global pandemic and the cost of living crisis obviously is going global, poverty increases, which makes people more vulnerable to exploitation. These gangs are very clever, they're very astute, and they know who to target and how to target.
Right, but with a 100-fold, okay, but with a 100-fold increase, something has to be done, does it not? This is a lot of people are suffering here. It should be stopped. So what's the way to do it?
Austin, there's no soundbite way to say how to stop it. You need to tackle trafficking at stores, and I think one thing all of us agree on is we need to be tackling the trafficking gangs. That means making it easier for people to come forward to export, so that they can then potentially, go to the authorities and say, these are the gangs.
Okay.
If you make it harder for them, the gangs operate in silence.
Got to leave it there. Daniel Sahaji, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Home Office gave us a statement earlier claiming that the government has delivered on its promise to the British people to take back control of our immigration system. We did ask to speak to a minister to discuss that assertion, but the department refused to make anyone available to speak on camera today. Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP, Tim Lawton, who's a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee and has a constituency on the English Channel. Tim Lawton, thanks for coming on the programme. The government says it is taking back control. From what we saw today in Porrick O'Brien's piece, from the numbers, it's clearly not taking back control. And the only reason why that boat was prevented from crossing the channel is because a couple of French police officers slashed the boat with a knife and deflated it.
Well, the government may be taking back control on paper, but in practice, it's clearly not happening because the record numbers coming across the channel just show that. And what is really frustrating is that the record numbers we had in one day earlier this week, over half of them were Albanian. And whether it is for trafficking or through people smuggling, Albania is not a war zone. Albania is not a whole-scale abuser of human rights. And Albania has no particularly close relationship with the UK. So why is it becoming our problem? And that's where I disagree, I'm afraid, with Daniel Sahaga. It's not going to help anybody if we give asylum to lots of Albanians who then come here, because it will just attract more to come here. What needs to happen is a greater cooperation with the Albanian authorities, and we've had the announcement today, helping clamp down on this vile trade in people trafficking and people smuggling, and breaking up those criminal gangs and stopping them coming across the channel and making millions out of it, as they are.
But the way to do that is right here in the UK. I mean, this is about law enforcement in the UK, on UK soil, of Albanian contractors or people smugglers who are bringing people over.
Well, it's about two things. It's about better breaking up of the gangs, and there's been a deal of success with that. And as you saw in that report, some of the Kurdish-run gangs, there have been a number of arrests recently, which is partly why the Albanians have stepped in. But there is an easy way to stop this, and that relies on the French, and it's quite extraordinary. The scenes we saw of the French police arriving on the beaches to actually apprehend them, well, not apprehend them, but stop them getting in the water. That's just not happening enough. And if the French were to decide, as they are entitled to, and indeed obliged to under international law, to apprehend, intercept those boats if they are in the water and take the passengers back to France, so that they spend a lot of money paying criminal gangs for a round trip, or you notice when they did puncture that boat, good tactic, brave policemen against a large number of potential migrants there, none of them were arrested. So I'm afraid what will happen, if your reporter's back on that beach tomorrow, you'll probably see the same people with a different boat trying their arm again. And it's really down to the French, as we would do here, to arrest them, to analyse whether they've got any right to be in France in the first place. Many of them will have failed in their asylum applications in France, and to take ownership of that problem rather than try to make it our problem.
Well, I don't know if you noticed in that report, there was a French couple, and they were more or less saying to the police and to the Albanians, off you go, off to the island. I mean, the fact is also that before Brexit, under the Dublin Agreement, it was an awful lot easier to send people back.
Well, it just wasn't, was it? Because if you actually look at the figures...
Look at the numbers.
Before Brexit, the number of people who were being returned as a proportion of those coming across the Channel or other routes was still really, really low. And during the pandemic, the French and the Germans were using that as an excuse, and they actually put a limit on the number we could return under the Dublin
hardly anyone
Agreement
was travelling during the pandemic.
Which was in single figures. There were a lot of people still travelling during the pandemic, and there were people that we were trying to deport from pre the pandemic after their asylum claims had been rejected, that they wouldn't let to go back. So let's not try and make out that this is something to do with Brexit. This is down to the French not intercepting those boats in the water and not arresting those people trying to commit a criminal act, which it is, paying people traffickers to come across the channel to enter the UK legally.
Very briefly, whether it's Rwanda or it's this, the government is throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks when it comes to this policy.
Well, the Rwanda scheme is not the ideal scheme, and it's yet to start, and that's the problem. Now, we need the Rwanda scheme to start to send out a very strong message that actually, if you do pay people smugglers to get into a boat to come across the channel, it's now a complete lottery as to whether you will end up in a hotel in Kent or on a plane to Rwanda. So don't do it. Whatever we think about the claims of various people coming here, and there are some very worthy, deserving cases who, frankly, are being queue-jumped by Albanian economic migrants.
Got to leave it there. Tim Lawton, thanks very much indeed.